The courtroom was silent until Karoline Leavitt tapped her fingers twice and her dog Bruno sprang into action. What happened next stunned even the federal judge, halting the entire trial in its tracks. This wasn't just about one man accused of betraying America. It was about uncovering something far more dangerous, right under everyone's nose. And the person who saw it coming wasn't a seasoned agent or career prosecutor. It was Karoline and her scarred, battle-tested dog. Stay with us, because what Bruno exposed could rewrite everything we thought we knew about loyalty, justice, and national betrayal. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. had seen its fair share of drama, but never like this. Not with a German shepherd at the center of it all, not with a single hand gesture bringing the wheels of justice screeching to a halt. The day began, like any other, in that marble-walled chamber. Reporters shuffled their notes, secretaries clicked away on keyboards, and the judge adjusted his robe for the fourth time that morning. But the moment Karoline Leavitt entered the courtroom with Bruno trotting beside her, everything changed. To some, she was just the White House press secretary, young, composed, and politically sharp. But those who knew her background understood better. Karoline was one of the few remaining voices in Washington who still believed in duty, in honor, and in something bigger than party lines. And then there was Bruno. Battle-scarred and quiet, Bruno wasn't just a loyal companion, he was a weapon. A veteran of multiple covert missions during the Trump administration, he'd sniffed out bombs, hidden recorders, and even a foreign agent hiding in plain sight. The jagged scar across his left flank was a reminder of the night he threw himself between his handler and a grenade. He survived, barely. Karoline never left his side after that. The trial that day was high stakes. Victor Grayson, a former Pentagon intelligence officer, stood accused of leaking sensitive information to Chinese operatives. No concrete evidence had surfaced, just whispers, odd inconsistencies, and gut feelings. Karoline had insisted on attending. Officially, her presence was to represent the administration's commitment to security transparency, but unofficially, she suspected something. Something no one else had caught. As she took her seat in the front row beside the prosecutors, she gave Bruno a soft pat. He sat quietly, eyes scanning the room like a soldier on alert. His ears twitched at every cough, every shuffled foot, every breath. It was like watching a tensioned bowstring ready to snap. Across the room, Grayson sat composed, too composed. His hands were folded perfectly, his face unreadable. Karoline narrowed her eyes. She'd seen that look before, at briefings, in foreign dignitaries, in men who lied for a living. Then came the moment. Karoline's hand moved gently, 2 light taps against the oak table. A secret signal only Bruno knew, one they'd practiced countless times in mock drills and private training sessions. No words, no noise, just intent. Bruno reacted immediately. He didn't bark, he didn't jump. He rose slowly, almost silently. His body tensed, his head tilted slightly. Then the low growl began, a sound so deep and guttural that it seemed to come from the bones of the earth itself. Everyone heard it. Judge Daniel Harper, an ironclad veteran of the bench with over 30 years of experience, paused mid-sentence. His gavel hand hovered in the air as he looked at the dog, then at Karoline, then back to Bruno. Bruno's eyes locked onto Grayson, not moving, not blinking. A whisper spread through the courtroom like a gust of wind through dry grass. What's going on? Why is the dog growling? Something's not right. Grayson shifted slightly in his seat, just a flinch. But Karoline caught it. Bruno caught it. Judge Harper brought the gavel down with a thunderous crack. Court is recessed. 15 minutes. Everybody out, now. Panic didn't erupt. Not yet. But tension, it was thick enough to choke on. Outside in the hallway, Karoline knelt beside Bruno. You saw it, didn't you, boy? She whispered. Bruno rested his head against her shoulder, calm now, but alert. An older man in a beige trench coat stopped to look at them, his cane tapping against the marble. Ma'am, he said, tipping his cap with shaking hands, whatever that dog just saw, you trust it. I fought in Korea. I've seen men who could smell evil, and I believe your dog just did. Karoline nodded, her eyes stinging more than she expected. Back in the courtroom, Judge Harper remained seated. He hadn't moved. He was reviewing his notes, yes, but mostly he was staring at Grayson. He'd seen thousands of defendants, some scared, some smug, some so guilty it was written in their sweat. But never one who panicked at a dog's growl. In the security room, federal agents had already begun checking for devices, tracking bugs, any unusual signals in the courtroom airwaves. A tech named Olivia ran a quick scan, then paused. "Sir?" she called. "We've got an encrypted ping, just one, originating near the defendant's desk." The judge blinked, slowly, and then he looked down at the still warm gavel in his hand. That dog hadn't just reacted, he had pointed. And Karoline Leavitt? She had known to give the signal. This wasn't about court theatrics anymore. It was national security, it was truth. And somehow, this woman and her war-scarred companion were the only ones in the room who'd been paying close enough attention to see it all unfold. It began with the silence after the storm. As the courtroom emptied, murmurs echoing like ghost voices across the marble floor, Karoline remained standing beside Bruno. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The weight of what had just occurred pressed into every line of her face. FBI agent Ethan Brooks was already on the move. With graying temples, a pressed gray suit, and years of espionage investigation behind him, he'd learned to trust instincts, the kind that can't be taught in training manuals. And right now, his instincts were screaming. He approached Karoline. "Whatever that dog picked up, I want to know about it. Now," he said, his tone clipped but not unkind. Karoline looked him dead in the eye. "Bruno doesn't growl unless he senses a threat, and if it's what I think it is, we're not just dealing with a leaker, we're dealing with an embedded enemy." Brooks gave a tight nod, then tapped his earpiece. "Get forensics in here, now." Bruno was already at the defendant's table again. He sniffed along the base, the legs beneath the cushion. Then he froze, his muscles coiled like a loaded spring. A low growl, again. Agent Olivia Bennett joined the team at that moment. "Got something?" she asked. Brooks nodded. "He's locked in. Pull that cushion." They did, and there it was. A device, small, black, almost invisible to the naked eye, but its blinking red light gave it away. "A listening device," Olivia confirmed. "Military grade, not the kind you find on the open market." Brooks turned toward the judge, who had quietly returned to the bench. "We need this area cleared. This is now a federal investigation." Judge Harper, his jaw tight with concern, gave a single nod. Karoline knelt beside Bruno, stroking the fur behind his ears. "You found it, boy. I knew you would." But something still tugged at her gut. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sun had just started its descent over Washington, D.C., when the buzz from the courthouse rippled across media outlets nationwide. A seasoned intelligence analyst from a defense think tank tweeted, "I don't know what just happened in that courtroom, but something real just cracked open." That tweet alone was retweeted over 20,000 times in an hour. America was watching, and Karoline Leavitt stood at the center. Back inside the courthouse, Judge Daniel Harper didn't call court back into session immediately. Instead, he called a private conference in his chambers. There sat Karoline, Bruno lying calmly at her feet. Across from them, Prosecutor Anna Reynolds, 2 federal agents, and a tech analyst from Homeland Security. On the judge's desk sat a small, blinking device, the same one Bruno had zeroed in on. It looked like nothing, the size of a coat button, but it hummed with something deeper: betrayal. "I've seen these before," Agent Ethan Brooks said, squinting at the component. "It's not just a bug, it's a signal relay. Sends info remotely, encrypted over short bursts. This thing could transmit classified data without ever being detected by traditional sweeps." "Where's it from?" Judge Harper asked. The tech analyst, Rebecca Han, didn't look up from her laptop. "Based on firmware signatures, Chinese military grade." The room dropped several degrees. Karoline's voice broke the silence. "So we're no longer just talking about leaking Pentagon information. We're talking about an active, real-time espionage operation happening inside this courthouse." No one argued. Judge Harper leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Is it transmitting now?" Rebecca shook her head. "No, we killed the signal when Bruno found it, but we got about 3 minutes of recorded data before that." Anna Reynolds tilted her head. "Can you isolate anything from those 3 minutes?" Rebecca hesitated, then clicked something. "Audio file, low quality, but listen." They did. Static, footsteps, a man's voice, soft, intentional. And proceed as planned. They won't suspect. Leavitt has no authority. Dog is a risk. The silence afterward was heavier than the words themselves. That's Grayson, Ethan said immediately. I've interviewed him. That's his voice. Harper's jaw clenched. He was communicating from inside a federal courtroom. Karoline shook her head. Not just communicating, coordinating, with someone, maybe more than one. She looked down at Bruno. He knew. Bruno wagged his tail slightly, sensing her calm but alert posture. He was a dog, yes, but not just any dog. And Karoline knew his instincts had just saved the country from something far darker than anyone had suspected. Across the city, in a secure Homeland Security lab, analysts began working through metadata, signal pings, and encryption layers. Within 2 hours, they traced one recipient device to a commercial property outside Arlington, registered to a fake shell company with ties to a Chinese financial conglomerate flagged by the Treasury Department 2 years ago. At 8:17 p.m., a raid team was authorized, and Karoline was invited to attend. She didn't hesitate. The air around the property in Arlington buzzed with tension. Drones flew silently overhead. Tactical units flanked both sides of the building. Karoline stood with Agent Brooks at the command center, Bruno sitting at her side in full vest, his scar visible in the moonlight. You sure you're okay being out here? Ethan asked. She smiled faintly. This started in my courtroom. I want to see where it ends. Then came the breach. Glass shattered. Boots thundered. Orders were shouted in muffled bursts, and within minutes, they had control. Inside the warehouse, behind a false wall, they found it. Computer servers, paper files, maps of federal buildings, and communications logs dated back over 3 years. On a desk lay a photograph. Karoline Leavitt, circled in red ink. She picked it up, stared at it for a moment. They've been watching me? Probably longer than you think, Ethan muttered, and I'll bet anything Bruno was the wild card they didn't plan for. Among the files was one particularly chilling document, a briefing prepared in Mandarin, outlining how to use court trials to manipulate American public opinion by leaking disinformation mid-hearing. Grayson was just one node in a larger operation, and Karoline had stepped on the tail of a dragon. The next morning, back at the courthouse, Judge Harper reconvened the trial, but not to continue proceedings. Instead, he cleared the public gallery and allowed a select team of federal investigators to address the court. Victor Grayson, looking visibly shaken, was brought in wearing handcuffs this time. Karoline sat silently behind the prosecution's table. Bruno lay quietly under the bench. Agent Brooks stood before the judge. Your Honor, in light of last night's operation, we submit into evidence documents proving Mr. Grayson's role as a central operative in a Chinese-backed espionage ring. We have server logs, financial records, and communications that tie directly to classified leaks from the Pentagon. Grayson didn't even flinch. Anna Reynolds stood. In addition, Your Honor, we submit audio files of Mr. Grayson discussing Ms. Leavitt and her dog as obstacles to his operations, along with real-time transmission logs captured during the trial itself. Reed, Grayson's lawyer, leaned toward his client, but Grayson shook his head slowly. Then, for the first time since his arrest, he spoke clearly. I want to change my plea. Gasps erupted from the few spectators in the room. To guilty, Judge Harper blinked. All charges? Yes, Grayson said. All of them. Karoline closed her eyes, exhaling quietly. Her hand reached down, brushing Bruno's fur. He nudged her ankle gently. He knew. By nightfall, Victor Grayson's confession had gone viral. News anchors across the nation were scrambling to cover the story. Headlines screamed across screens. Karoline Leavitt's dog sniffs out national spy ring. Courtroom canine cracks. Espionage case. Grayson pleads guilty. After hero. Dog identifies hidden device. But for Karoline, it wasn't about the press. It was about knowing that instincts, her own and Bruno's, had saved American lives. As she walked out of the courthouse under the glow of camera flashes, one elderly woman in the crowd reached out and pressed something into Karoline's hand. It was a wrinkled photo of a soldier and a dog, both smiling, somewhere in the sands of Iraq. Thank you, the woman said, for remembering what matters. Karoline smiled. She looked down at Bruno and whispered, Ready for the next fight, partner? Bruno wagged his tail. The morning after the confession, the Capitol buzzed like a hornet's nest. Congressional aides whispered about secret trials. Security analysts flooded the airwaves, breaking down what real-time espionage meant for American courtrooms. And for the people at home, especially the older generation who'd lived through the Cold War and the September 11th aftermath, it all felt eerily familiar. Like history wasn't just repeating, it was roaring back, wearing a new face. Karoline Leavitt, now the center of a growing political firestorm, sat quietly in a secured government vehicle, heading to a classified intelligence briefing. Bruno, ever calm and poised, rested his head on her knee. She stared out the window, the Washington Monument standing tall in the distance, a reminder of what she had just defended. Across the city at Langley, intelligence officers had pulled every thread from the Arlington raid. What emerged wasn't just shocking, it was staggering. The spy ring Grayson was part of wasn't isolated. It was one tentacle of a far-reaching operation aimed at destabilizing public trust in America's legal system, especially the judiciary. The plot was chilling in its simplicity. Place operatives in sensitive institutions, use courtrooms to launder false narratives, and leak disinformation during high-profile trials to manipulate public opinion and policy. This wasn't just about selling secrets. It was about breaking the country from within. As Karoline entered the Situation Room beneath the Capitol, a hush fell over the space. Generals, senators, federal agents, all turned as she walked in. Some saluted, others just nodded, eyes wide with respect. But no one said a word until she sat down. "The President asked for a full debriefing," said Secretary Davidson, head of Homeland Security. "Miss Leavitt, you're the only civilian who's had direct contact with the device, the accused, and the interception. We need to know everything." Karoline took a breath. Grayson had a plan. A multi-layered communication system designed to bypass conventional cybersecurity. The listening device in the courtroom wasn't just for eavesdropping. It was a drop point for encrypted data, triggered by proximity and keywords. A general leaned in. "And the dog?" She smiled faintly. Bruno knew something was off. Dogs smell adrenaline, deception, fear. Grayson gave off a scent that screamed danger. The intelligence officer to her right raised an eyebrow. He recognized Grayson? Karoline nodded. Not just Grayson. Later, at the Arlington site, Bruno led us to a compartment buried under a floorboard. Without him, we would have missed it. That space held the hard drive that confirmed everything. A beat of silence. Then applause broke out, soft, scattered, respectful. But Karoline didn't smile. Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't over," she said. Back at the courthouse, security had been ramped up to levels not seen since 9/11. Karoline was scheduled to testify before a closed Senate subcommittee later that week. But before that, she had one more mission. Uncover the link between Grayson and the man known only in the intelligence files as the Mandarin. Through surveillance footage, decrypted phone records, and facial recognition matches, investigators had zeroed in on a contact, an international businessman named Liang Xiao, operating under diplomatic cover at the Chinese embassy. What alarmed agents most wasn't just Xiao's presence. It was that he had visited the courthouse 3 weeks before Grayson's trial, posing as an academic observer. Karoline reviewed the footage. There, at the edge of the courtroom, sat Xiao in a gray suit, sunglasses on indoors, watching, waiting. Bruno, sitting beside her, growled at the screen. She whispered, "You remember him, don't you?" The dog's ears perked, his body tensed. The next step came fast. Karoline and a small federal team headed to a diplomatic dinner that Xiao was rumored to be attending. It was delicate, high risk, because Xiao had immunity. But Karoline had something else. Bruno. They entered the room under the guise of security protocol, scanning for devices after the recent courtroom breach. As they passed Xiao, Bruno tensed again, just like in court. Karoline gave him the same subtle signal, 3 taps on her side. Bruno turned his head, growled low, then sat. It wasn't just posturing, it was recognition. Karoline turned to Xiao. "Sir, would you mind stepping over here?" He didn't blink. "Diplomatic immunity," he said smoothly. Karoline smiled. "We're not accusing, we're just confirming." But Xiao's reaction betrayed him. He turned briskly toward the exit. Within seconds, Secret Service had him in custody, not for criminal prosecution, but for immediate deportation and surveillance. Bruno had confirmed the connection. The fallout over the next 48 hours was swift and unforgiving. Several mid-level officials in the Pentagon were placed on administrative leave. Senatorial hearings were scheduled. An emergency bipartisan task force on cyber-judicial integrity was formed. And Karoline Leavitt, who had merely come to court to oversee secure communications, was now being hailed as a national hero. But fame wasn't what mattered. That evening, Karoline sat in the quiet of her apartment, Bruno resting at her feet, watching the city lights shimmer across the Potomac. She opened a letter that had been slid under her office door earlier that day. It was from a retired judge, handwritten in blue ink. Dear Ms. Leavitt, thank you for restoring something we've lost. Faith. Faith in process. Faith in instinct. Faith in the quiet courage of doing what's right when no one expects you to. You and your dog reminded us that the truth still matters. With respect, Judge Harold R. Nunez, Reti. Karoline read it twice, then 3 times. Bruno stirred. She reached down, scratching behind his ears. We're not done yet, boy. This country still needs a few good dogs. Bruno wagged his tail, then rested his head against her leg. Outside, the Capitol glowed in the dark, silent but standing. The dawn after Liang Chao's removal felt different. No blaring headlines yet, just a soft buzz of uneasy hope. In homes across the country, from quiet farmhouses in Nebraska to worn porches in North Carolina, seniors sipped their coffee slower, watching, waiting. Something had shifted, and they knew it. Back in Washington, Karoline Leavitt was meeting behind closed doors with National Security Advisor William Ford. She wasn't in a press suit today. She wore a navy sweater, jeans, and had Bruno lying at her feet. But her voice carried the weight of someone who'd already walked through fire. Ford pointed at a classified dossier on the desk. This is everything we've pulled on Chao's network. Shell companies, phantom bank accounts, covert travel documents. But there's a bigger concern. Someone at the top approved the classified briefings that were later leaked. Karoline's brow furrowed. You're saying there's a mole? Ford nodded grimly. Possibly in the federal judiciary, maybe even someone tied to Judge Harper. Her chest tightened. Harper had been cold, fair, almost fatherly in court. But in D.C., fair didn't always mean clean. Karoline reached down, petting Bruno gently. If we're going to follow this to the end, we follow the paper trail. Ford smiled wryly. I figured you'd say that. That's why I've arranged for something special. Moments later, Karoline and Bruno stepped into a dimly lit archive room beneath the Justice Department. Rows upon rows of old files, digital logs, and video transcripts surrounded them. A federal data analyst, Ava Moreno, a genius with a photographic memory and a keyboard, welcomed her. I've already pulled Judge Harper's case assignments and classified briefings, Ava said. There's one anomaly. He requested early access to sealed exhibits in Grayson's trial before the defense even received them. Karoline's eyes narrowed. Why? Ava tilted her head. No reason on record, but there's more. The access came through a secondary login. It wasn't Harper's. Karoline stood still. The silence was louder than thunder. Who has that kind of clearance? She asked. Only one person, Ava said. His deputy, Margaret Sloan. Sloan, Harper's longtime confidant. The woman who had, just days ago, helped escort Karoline and Bruno into the courtroom. Karoline's jaw tightened. She was with us, every step. Bruno stirred. They now had a new target. It didn't take long to locate Sloan. She was at her townhouse in Georgetown. Surveillance showed she hadn't left in 24 hours. Karoline insisted on going in herself, with Bruno. When they knocked, Sloan opened the door with a cool smile, as if expecting them. Miss Leavitt, she said, and Bruno. Inside, the air was heavy. Curtains drawn, papers scattered across the dining table, a laptop screen frozen on a blank email draft. We're not here to accuse you, Karoline said. We're here to ask you why. Sloan blinked slowly. Because America no longer values the Constitution. Because men like Grayson weren't anomalies. They were symptoms. Karoline took a step forward. So you sold out your country? I tried to save it, Sloan snapped, from its own rot. Bruno growled low. And then Sloan laughed. That dog, He always knew. Karoline gave the subtle hand signal. Bruno lunged, not to attack, but to knock the laptop to the floor. It landed with a crash, the screen flickering. Ava, monitoring from HQ, called out through Karoline's earpiece. "We've got a trace." She was transmitting live. Sloane's face crumbled. It was over. 3 days later, Karoline testified in front of a joint session of Congress. The room was filled with solemn lawmakers, many old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the scars of 9/11. They had seen fear before. But today, they saw something else. Hope. Karoline didn't read from notes. She spoke from the heart. "I was sent to that courtroom to observe, to make sure procedures were followed. But what I found was more than espionage. I found complacency. I found rot. But I also found courage in agents like Ethan, analysts like Ava, and in one dog, scarred by war, who could still smell truth from a lie." The room was silent. "I didn't come here to be a hero," she said. "I came here to do my job, to protect our institutions, to protect you." She looked toward the public gallery, veterans, grandmothers, churchgoers, patriots. This country doesn't need perfection. It needs faith, and folks like you, who never stop believing in it. Applause thundered. That night, Karoline and Bruno returned to a quiet apartment. No cameras, no briefings. Just peace. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat on the floor beside Bruno. "Think we did all right, huh?" He wagged his tail. Then, from her inbox, a new email arrived. Subject, urgent. New case involving cyber vulnerability in the Supreme Court's internal system. She closed the laptop slowly. "Guess we're not done yet." Bruno barked softly, almost like a laugh. The fight for truth never ends. If you believe in faith, freedom, and the people who quietly hold the line, subscribe to this channel. Stories like this aren't fiction. They reflect the courage happening every day in the shadows. Comment below. Would you have trusted Bruno's signal? And stay with us for more powerful stories that remind us truth still matters. We'll see you in the next one.